Hey guys, we're back with doing another video in the series. Today I'm with Dave Anderson. Met him several years ago through some SWAT guys at Garland who've had a relationship with him. And I'll let him intro himself about his background and how he kind of transferred over from military into law enforcement training field. And then we'll kind of dive into his book. In some of his training he's provided across the state and across the country for law enforcement.
Well, thanks, Clint. My name's Dave Anderson, and my background is I'm the son of an Army general. My father went to West Point, and I went to West Point, and after serving in the first Gulf War, got out and spent 20 years in the corporate world. And then I left the corporate world about 5-6 years ago, actually 7 years ago now, and started my own company focused on leadership development and training. But in October of 16, my father and I published the book, Becoming a Leader of Character. And that is, when that book came out...
I would suggest everybody grab it.
Thank you. When Becoming a Leader of Character came out, some of my guys that I served in the military with, West Point buddies and things, read the book. And they're now in law enforcement, and they're like, Dave, we got nothing like this that talks about leadership in this way in law enforcement. And then some other agencies started getting in contact with me because they grabbed a hold of it, and then thanks to their help, I've been able to take what I've been doing with corporate clients and things, and take what we have in here and design a whole curriculum that's focused on law enforcement, and been able to implement that across a lot of different agencies in Texas now.
In your background in military and being a West Point grad, you are able to relate uniquely to law enforcement, whereas a lot of civilians who've never been in law enforcement can't. You have a great perspective and ability to relate. But you and I were chatting earlier, and although law enforcement is very paramilitary and they cross over and marry in many ways, you brought up a great point earlier in one true way that though developing leadership are very different, and you had a great point about that if you'd share.
Well, yeah, and I think anybody out there who's in law enforcement now, who military, you'll probably be nodding your head when you hear this. But what's very different is that I've seen in law enforcement, and talking with, speaking with guys like you and who've been in law enforcement, is that where in the military, everybody's responsible for developing the people below them. A corporal is responsible for developing the private. The E5 is just responsible for the development of the E4s and the people below them. E6 is to the E5s. Everybody's responsible for making sure the people below them are ready for the next man up.
If the sergeant's shot, the corporal better step right up.
Absolutely. But what I've seen so far in law enforcement, and what are the feedback I'm getting from people in law enforcement, most people don't feel like there's anybody really in tune with developing them and preparing them for that next man up type situation. And I think that's a big missing element in the development process within law enforcement right now.
Well, and when you said that, it hit home significantly, because I visit with agencies or I get phone calls that our chief is leaving or we've run our chief off, and I say, my next question is, do you have an internal candidate? Is your assistant chief's ready or your captain's ready? And probably more than half the time the answer is no, we have no internal candidate prepared to step up. And if your chief has been there or your leader's been there at the sheriff's department or wherever for a period of time, there's no reason someone should not be prepared, should not have prepared themselves. And Dave has a philosophy on that about you can't wait on the chief or the sheriff to groom you as well.
Yeah, well, when I've spoken to some people about it, they've been in that situation, they complain about the people above them, and I'm like, those are valid complaints. Those chiefs, those lieutenants should be developing the people below them. That's part of their job. That's a leader's job, is to prepare the people below them and to develop them. But if they're not doing it, okay, time to put on our big boy pants and say, what am I doing to prepare myself? It's still my responsibility to be ready for to be the next man up. And to sit there and just point up at the people above me and say, well, they aren't doing it for me. Well, yes, but what are you doing to develop yourself? There's resources out there. There are resources out there. And by the way, I truly believe in just about every department, somebody is going to say, if you ask them for help and say, help me get better at something, somebody is going to be available to say, sure, why not? I'll help you.
Well, in Dave's training, I assumed was for leadership or executive or upper management or mid-level management. And Dave's got a great opinion on when a citizen sees us roll up, they don't care what your title, what your rank. And your philosophy is really, if you have a badge on, you're a leader and you're expected to be a leader.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't really care, and I don't think anybody cares what your rank is when you roll up on the scene, and there are civilians standing there, and whether or not those people like people in blue or not, it still doesn't matter, because as soon as somebody steps out of that squad car, that person is a leader on the scene, because what that person says needs to happen is what is waiting for something to happen. So we've got to prepare leaders at all levels. I mean, we know it. You see it in sports all the time. A team with leaders at every level will always beat a team that has only one leader at the top. Just if the coach is the only leader on that bench, that team's lost. But if you got leaders throughout the organization, that team's going to win on the court. That team's going to win when they get out.
Well, they used to always say it was unfair because Peyton Manning being on the field was like having another head coach
Absolutely.
on the field.
Right.
And they always felt like they were at a disadvantage playing because they had two head coaches
Right.
on their team.
Right.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
I posed to Dave earlier about, in my opinion, I feel like leadership's a dying trait. That the old school decisive leaders is really kind of a dying trait. And Dave brings up a good point in his book. The title of it is Becoming Leaders of Character. Everyone wants to be a leader now, and everyone wants to think they're a leader, or they give themselves the title of something. But I think maybe Dave's right that maybe leadership's not a dying trait, but maybe character. Or people, we become quite selfish as Americans, and sometimes character doesn't fit into selfishness. And I think his book, and there's habits of being a good leader if you'd share those. But
Yeah.
it's really opened my eyes because I get pretty crass, and I'm pretty passionate about leadership. And I guess maybe the old style leadership that I grew up under has changed, but I think people's character and selfishness has maybe ingrained itself more, which maybe has lessened the dynamic of leadership. And would you share your habits with
Yeah.
leaders?
Well, what we talk about are 6 habits of character. We talk about courage, humility, selflessness, duty, and positivity. And integrity. I left integrity out there. But and the interesting thing is when we start with courage and humility, because they're really the foundational habits of character for everything we do. And most people say, well, integrity is the most important thing you've got to have as a leader. And I used to think that, and I truly believed that for the longest time. And most books are going to talk about integrity and say, a leader needs to have it. But the interesting thing is, we start with courage and humility because if you think about it, you can't have integrity unless you have courage. Now, when I speak to law enforcement, I want to always make sure I'm clear. I'm not talking about physical courage because I think you guys have proved that. And you'd be gone in a heartbeat. You wouldn't be in the job that you're in if you didn't have the physical courage. It's the moral courage to make those decisions, right? It's the moral courage to act when, even at personal cost, to speak up, even though it might cost you something personally. That's actually the definition that we use of integrity. But see, each one, we call these, our character is the sum total of our habits, our good habits and our bad habits. And that might cause some people to pause because we all have bad habits of character, But the thing is, just your character is like a muscle. You got to exercise it. And none of us would think that we're going to get in shape by going to the gym once a year. Right?
I wish.
Yeah. I'm going to go to some leadership seminar and all of a sudden I become a leader.
Right.
Right? No. You got to do it regularly and consistently. You got to exercise these muscles. Nobody would think that you're going to read a fitness magazine and get in shape.
But I think reading all the feedback from law enforcement that have taken your course, I think where law enforcement has failed is we send officers to all these management schools and supervisor schools, and they don't necessarily have anything to do with being a leader. And I think that's where your ability and why the feedback across the state and the country has been so strong about your there's a big difference between being a manager of people and being a leader.
Right.
One's a title, and one is the ability that people are going to follow you. And there's so much focused on being a manager that I think we lose track of being a leader.
Well, and the leadership's about people, management's about resources. And I don't necessarily like the term even human resources, because that makes people sound like they're on the same level as, you know, the equipment we use and the money that we have in our budgets, right? But one of the things I clarify is when we think about the biggest leadership failures we know of, right? You know, the guys maybe we worked with, or people, you know, we know in history or even in the news these days. You know, how often is it the fact that that person failed because they didn't know what to do or how to do it?
Sure.
It's hardly ever a competency issue. Most people know what to do and how to do it. It's the issue is when they're tested, when they're at that moment of choosing, when they have to choose between the harder right and the easier wrong, and their character fails. And
Or they have paralysis by analysis and do nothing.
Well, and that's a character issue, because the paralysis, why are they paralyzed? It goes back to two issues: fear or pride. They don't want to make a mistake because it might make them look bad. That's pride. Or fear, they don't want to make a mistake because they're afraid of what might happen to them if they do. And guess what? That's why we start with courage and humility, because you got it. Every one of those decisions is a character rep. I've got a good friend, Colonel Craig Flowers, who talks about character in sports, and he calls them character reps. But that's you're exercising these muscles. Mm-hmm. And oh my God, in everybody's life, but in law enforcement, the opportunity to exercise these muscles is there every single day. And it's not just exercising them with the citizens. It's exercising them when you get back into the squad house and you're sitting down with your peers. You know, and that's where so much of the leadership stuff we focus on is not about what do you necessarily do when you do pull up on the scene, because there's a lot of other experts on that, and I don't have a law enforcement background. But what we talk about is what are you doing within the families, and I'm talking about the family that you have at work and the families you have at home, because we talk a lot about the home life as well and how character affects that.
Sure. Yeah, law enforcement certainly is a lifestyle that you take it home with you, and there's a whole different dynamic.
Well, and some people pointed me in some good direction with Gil Martin's book and things, and taught me a lot about hypervigilance and really working to understand the lives that you guys lead, and trying to make sure that when we talk about these things, like I told you before, I don't want to be some business guy pounding a round peg into a square hole. I'm working hard to always learn about the life of the law enforcement officer, so when we talk about this stuff, mm-hmm. we're relating it back.
Sure. Do you see, you know, my opinion is it just feels like leadership has really changed, and I'm sure your dad being a general, you get what I'm saying about mm-hmm. kind of the old school decisive, I'm a leader, because I hear guys all the time saying, you know, my sergeant and my lieutenant, I wouldn't follow, if the PD was on fire, if the sheriff's department was on fire, I wouldn't follow him out of it, you know. Right. Do you think it's changed? Do you see that pendulum swinging back around? Is there ability through good training to change that?
Well, I absolutely believe that good training and consistent training on these issues, there's an ability to train, but it's the type of training that there is, because you mentioned it. It's true in the corporate world, it's true in law enforcement, that what there is of leadership training is focused on more management skills than it is about who you are. See, people don't follow us because of what we can do, they follow us because of who we are. Mm-hmm. It's the same reason, you know, leaders fail not because of what they can do or can't do, competency, right? They fail because of character. Same people don't follow us because we're so competent. They want to follow us because of who we are. Who do we prove? Are we somebody of courage? Are we somebody of humility? Or are we somebody they can count on to do the right thing, even if it could cost us personally? Integrity. Are they somebody that put the needs of other people first? Selflessness. Or somebody who does our duty? Mm-hmm. Somebody who walks around. Are we somebody who walks around with a positive attitude or a negative attitude? You know, these people who always walk around like they've got a small turd hanging underneath their nose. Who wants to follow those guys? Right. So all these things are character traits, they're choices, and they're things that we can do in everyday life that prepares us for the leadership challenges that are going to come, whether it's at work, on the job, or at home.
Yeah.
You know, and so I truly believe that we've got to shift our focus back. I mean, people have called me a character evangelist because I like pound on the table. I'm saying this is what it needs to be. And I'm fine with that because look, I'm trying to lead a revival in this area because I do think it's what counts. I do think, and I hate everything, the negative press that the people who serve our communities get under because of a few bad actors across the country and things. But it's there. There's a perception there, and so often some of those things, you take those right back to character issues. Well, all of them are. Every single person in every situation that's gotten the bad press, it wasn't an issue that they didn't know what to do or how to do it. It was a character issue.
Sure. Yeah, we're our own worst, especially in law enforcement. We're often our own worst enemy.
Absolutely.
Guys, I don't push all training, but I would task you to look at his book or to get with your training coordinator to have his training brought in. And I love his philosophy. I learn something new every time I talk to people every day. But we always think of leadership as the lieutenants or the captains and above, and it begins with every one of us. Every one of us is a leader, and you never know. You may look up in 5 years and find you're a captain or an assistant chief or the chief deputy, and we never know when that day may come or that opportunity may come. And like he brought up, every call we roll up on, the civilian person standing out there, we're a leader in their eyes, and we're the leader that's going to fix their problems. And it starts with our character. And I hope you guys got something out of this. I'm passionate about leadership, and I often get frustrated and a little jaded about thinking that it's a dying trade, or it's often changed. But look Dave up. I will share his information on the post. And he's out of Tyler, but I know he's booked all over the state teaching and training law enforcement. And the feedback on his classes is out of this world. I'm jealous after reading his feedback. I would really task you, and again, I don't take lightly pushing trainers and training because I'm passionate about that, and I don't just push any training. So
Can I tell them one
absolutely.
last thing? Hey, if you're interested in finding out more, go to www.pdlead.com. That's Papa Delta Lead.com, and you'll see where the classes are currently scheduled here in the state of Texas, and also how, if you got an agency that's interested in bringing me in, that you can also find out the information.
And there's some agencies even using his book for promotional, required reading for promotional processes. So I think it's great that I'm a fan of focusing on leadership, not management, which often turns into micromanagement. I'm a fan of leadership, and that's why I chose this topic for this, and I appreciate it.
Thank you, bud.
Very much.
Appreciate it.